Her eyes remained fixed downward as the final footsteps faded beyond the leather entrance. The hide barrier settled into place with barely a whisper, sealing her within the amber glow of flickering flames and profound quiet. Perched on what might generously be called a bedwoven rushes cushioned by carefully arranged fur, she remained, motionless in the simple garment they'd provided at the trading post. Her original clothing had been consumed by fire alongside her father's wagon, reduced to ash and memory. Dirt clung to her palms, and deep cracks spoke of endless miles. The tears flowed freely. These weren't the kind that could be willed away. Beyond these walls, the rhythmic beating had ceased. The ceremonial meal was finished. Yet here, the magnitude of her new reality pressed against her ribs like granite. She understood her purpose now. Not a person, but currency. Not a bride, but a bargain struck between a settler daughter and an Apache brave to silence the guns after months of violence. Accept. Your fate, the official had declared. You're resilient. You'll endure. Yet endurance was a hollow substitute for truly living. Her boots remained laced tight-weathered leather, stiffened by countless stream crossings and stone-strewn paths until they barely yielded. She dared not slip them off. Movement itself felt forbidden. Then he appeared, silent as falling snow. The warrior. Her new husband. No words passed his lips as he paused near the doorway, his expression impossible to decipher. He defied her darkest expectations, neither ancient nor marked by cruelty. Tall and powerful, with obsidian hair bound at his nape and crimson leather encircling his forehead. His gaze found her eyes, not her form, not with desire, but her very essence. Somehow this made breathing even more difficult. The words escaped before she could stop them. Forgive me, her voice barely audible. I understand I'm not your choice. I understand I'm not, ... double quotes, her voice shattered. I'm not beautiful. He remained motionless for what felt like eternity. Then, without sound, he approached. She recoiled slightly, but his hands didn't seek her arms or waist. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee as naturally as breathing, and wordlessly began working at her boots' hardened laces. Her body went rigid as he freed the stubborn knots. The leather released with a brittle sigh, revealing her foot scarlet, wounded. Filthy trembling in the firelight, still maintaining silence. He retrieved a cloth, moistened it in a nearby vessel, and began cleansing her foot with deliberate gentleness. His eyes never lifted, never demanded acknowledgement or gratitude. His head simply bowed in what felt like worship. Upon finishing, he set the cloth aside, stood, and moved to tend the flames. Granting her space, but her eyes couldn't leave the damp outline her foot had left on the earth. Never before had anyone tended to her in such a way. Never had anyone made her feel holy. Sleep eluded her that night. Even as the fire dimmed to embers and the wind's voice softened to a gentle murmur. The pelts beneath her body offered comfort she'd forgotten existed, yet her mind churned with unspoken questions. The warrior had positioned his own blanket close enough for her to hear his measured breathing, yet distant enough to respect her boundaries. No demands came, no attempts at contact or conversation. He simply existed there like bedrock, immovable and reassuring. Dawn brought no commands, no expectations, no rules about wifely duties. He departed without words, allowing the entrance flap to fall gently closed. Hours passed in uncertainty. Should she follow or remain? Eventually, a girl near her own age entered. Apache, with gentle brown eyes and a single braid cascading down her back. She spoke no words but presented a folded garment crafted from supple deerskin. Gesturing softly toward her current dress, the settler girl she still thought of herself in those terms despite her old life's destruction, hesitated. "Must I wear this?" she whispered. The girl offered only a gentle smile before departing. That afternoon brought his return. She hadn't eaten or moved much, but had finally changed into the deerskin. And somehow it felt like shedding something poisonous. He entered carrying a wooden vessel filled with something steaming beans, squash, herbs. Without speaking, he offered it, sitting across from her as she ate. Swallowing under his observation proved difficult, yet he seemed free of judgment, watching with quiet intensity, as if trying to understand something beyond words. Finally, she broke. "You don't wish me here, do you?" Her voice wavered. "This wasn't your decision." Again, silence. But this time, his eyes held steady. Slowly, he reached into the leather pouch at his waist and withdrew something. A strand of small stones, carved and smoothed by time, warmed by his body. He placed it in her palm. "My sister wore this before her ceremony," he said at last. His voice resonated deep and low, like wind through stone passages. "She died when the snow came. She studied the stones shaped like river rocks, but painted with delicate, simple designs. Why offer this to me?" She asked. "You barely know me?" He paused, then replied, "Not yet. That was all." He rose again, stepped outside, and left her holding the necklace in hands that felt foreign too. That night, she placed it on the bed between them and slept for the first time, since her world had shattered. 3 dawns later, she woke to find the village women gathered outside their lodge, speaking in hushed voices while carrying bundles of scarlet fabric, feathers, and flower stems. Her husband, she still couldn't voice his name, was absent. But the braided girl returned, this time carrying purpose rather than clothing. She motioned for the settler girl to follow, and without understanding why, she obeyed. They moved through the settlement, past low dwellings and smoking hearths, past elders with bark-creased faces and children peering from behind baskets. Every eye seemed to track her movement. At the river clearing, the women formed a circle around her. Language barriers dissolved into irrelevance. They offered her a shallow bowl of water infused with something fragrant and green. One woman gestured for her to cleanse her face. Another combed her matted hair with patient fingers. A third painted a line down her part with red clay mixed with oil. Understanding dawned only when she saw the fabric soft and crimson stitched with bone-colored thread unfold before her. A dress ceremonial in nature, not meant for work or hunting or sleep. She stammered, confused. "Why? Why are you adorning me like this?" Again, answers came through looks, not language. As they helped her into the garment, she realized this was their version of a wedding. A genuine one, not the exchange of property between angry white men and stoic warriors, not a treaty signed in shadows. This was for them. For her, for him. She was being welcomed, not transferred. It startled her, then shattered something within that had been frozen since her arrival by the time they led her back through the village. Moisture tracked down her cheeks. At the lodge, he waited, freshly washed, wearing new buckskin that clung to his frame like armor. His long hair was bound behind his neck with red cord. The elders stood nearby. When he saw her, he didn't stare, didn't smirk, didn't look away. He bowed his head once, respectfully, as if acknowledging the weight of this moment for her. One elder spoke words in Apache, slow and rhythmic, then placed a carved staff between them. She didn't understand the language, but the gesture was clear. "Step across, and you are both part of this now." And she did. Her bare feet crossed the line, hands trembling. He reached for them, held them not tightly, not possessively, just enough that she didn't feel isolated. When the elder finished speaking, the villagers released a soft murmur of approval, then left them in silence once more. That night, she sat on the bed, not weeping this time, but uncertain. And again he knelt, wordlessly, took her feet in his hands, and loosened the leather bindings, brushing away dust from her trembling journey through the village. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she were made of silk. She closed her eyes and for the first time didn't feel ugly. Marriage remained a mystery to her. In her world, wives folded linens, bore children, and kept silent during dinner, while husbands discussed business and politics. But here, nothing resembled familiarity. No linens, no parlor, no Sunday pews, just woven mats, carved bowls, eternal fires, and people who communicated more through glances and offerings than declarations. Her husband, this Apache warrior who had never touched her without purpose or permission. Treated her less like a wife and more like a guest, still deciding whether to stay. He brought her berries in a carved wooden cup that morning, leaving it beside her feet with a nod. Later, when she went to the river to wash, she turned to find him quietly placing a thin woven shawl on a rock nearby in case she grew cold. He said nothing, just walked away again. But something was shifting within her. Not love, not yet, but the fortress she'd built in her chest was no longer quite so impenetrable. He had requested nothing, demanded nothing, not her obedience, not her touch, not even her gratitude. She remembered how the man who'd arranged her trade, a member of her town council, had spat the words, "This will keep them from our land," as if she were blood money, as if she lacked a name. But this man, this Apache, didn't even seem to need one from her. He had his own name, of course, Nantan, but he'd never forced her to speak it. That night, sitting near the fire outside their lodge, she watched him carve something into bark, his brow furrowed in concentration, fingers moving with deliberate precision. She didn't ask what he was creating, just observed. Then after what felt like hours, out. He looked up and spoke her name softly, the first time he'd voiced it. May, just that, as if he'd been testing the sound in his mind for days, and only now dared speak it aloud. She blinked. "You know my name?" He nodded once and said no more. The fire cracked between them. Later, in the quiet of their shelter, she lay on her side, not touching him, but aware of every breath he took. "I thought you'd despise me," she whispered into the darkness. "You didn't choose this." "Neither did I," no answer. Just the rhythm of firelight against the lodge walls and the steady sound of his breathing. But when she turned over slowly, hesitantly, she saw him lying there, still awake, eyes open, watching her without judgment. His gaze held no pity, no expectation, just presence. She didn't speak again. And neither did he, but the quiet between them no longer felt hollow. It felt full, as if words might destroy something sacred taking root. That night, when sleep finally claimed her, it did so without tears. And when she woke, her shoes were already cleaned and set by the doorway. May had begun to notice that the women observed her not cruelly, not with disdain, but with quiet patience. She didn't know how to respond. They didn't rush her, they didn't crowd. But every time she fetched water or stepped outside, she caught their eyes in the smallest nods. Not greetings, not invitations, just acknowledgments, as if they saw her, truly saw her, were waiting to see what she'd do with that visibility. That morning, Nantan left before sunrise. He didn't explain where he was going, only handed her a small bundle wrapped in hide and motioned toward the hearth, where fresh embers waited to be fed. She waited until he was gone before opening it. Inside were corn cakes wrapped in cloth, a strip of smoked meat, and a tiny carved comb, clearly too delicate for his use. It looked like something carved with care, maybe for a daughter, maybe a sister. But now it was hers, and just like that, she began brushing her hair again. She didn't accomplish much else that day. She swept the dust around their fire pit, rinsed a blanket in the river, helped a child who'd dropped her doll. It wasn't until the sun reached its highest point that the older woman appeared. Tall, wrapped in layers of fabric the color of sand and stone, she stepped into May's shadow without warning. Her face was lined but calm, and her dark eyes studied May like a puzzle. "I am Nasha," she said. Her voice was neither hard nor soft. "You live with Nantan now?" May nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. You eat our food, sleep in our shelter?" Another nod. "You do not yet walk among us." This made May freeze not in fear, but in shame, because it was true. She had existed among them like a ghost, wearing white skin and guilt. "I don't know what I'm allowed to do," May admitted, "or who I am here." Nasha didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled something from the pouch at her waist, a beaded loop of some kind, and held it out. "Tomorrow, you sit in the circle with the women if you want." She placed the loop in May's hand. It was smooth, warm from the sun. "No one will ask you to speak, but if you stay silent too long, your heart will dry." Then she walked away, May stared down at the beads in her palm, their colors earthy and soft. She didn't know what the circle was or what was expected. But she knew one thing: it was not an order. It was a door. That night when Nantan returned, he placed a fresh rabbit on the table and sat across from her. She wanted to tell him about the woman, the circle, the beads, but instead she held up the comb. "Thank you," she said. "It's beautiful." He smiled barely, but it was real. "It was my mother's," he said. Then, after a pause, "Now it's yours." She held it tighter. Something in her chest flickered. That night when she lay down beside him, she didn't curl away. She turned toward him and whispered, "If I sit with them, will they let me belong?" He didn't open his eyes, but he answered, "Only if you choose to." The morning sun was gentle, the kind that didn't press. But invited dawned May stood outside the lodge, holding the beaded loop Nasha had given her. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, the kind of fear that comes when you're about to step out of invisibility. Nantan had gone again, saying only North Trail, 2 days. That meant it was her choice now. No translator, no quiet presence beside her. Just May and the circle she didn't understand. Still, she followed the distant laughter of children and the smell of simmering maize toward the eastern edge of the village, where the women gathered under a low-hanging tree. They sat in a ring, cross-legged, busy with tasks, threading beads, grinding herbs, twisting fibers into rope. No one looked up when she arrived, but she felt them notice. Felt the silence bend around her like wind around stone. May hesitated on the edge. For a second, her feet wouldn't move. But then a little girl, maybe 5, with twin braids and fire in her smile, stood and walked over. She took May's hand and tugged it without a word. The circle opened, and May stepped in. No ceremony, no introductions. Just a space made for her and the warmth of bodies who had learned to survive by leaning together. Nasha was there, of course, and beside her, a younger woman whose eyes flicked curiously to May's pale skin. Another offered a thread spindle. It was a simple motion, but May took it with reverence. She hadn't spun thread before. Not like this, but her fingers remembered old habits, mending dresses, repairing socks, braiding her mother's hair. Different motions, same care. After some time, a quiet voice beside her said, "I'm Tiva." May glanced over. The younger woman, perhaps 20, with a necklace made of river stones and sharp eyes that saw everything. "May," she whispered. Tiva nodded. "Your husband is not unkind." "No," May replied. "He's not." "That helps." Tiva paused, then reached into a small basket and pulled out a length of soft-dyed fabric. "You don't have to wear their dresses, but you shouldn't wear white here. It scares the little ones." May looked down at her faded wedding shift, now dirt-streaked and worn. She hadn't thought of how it might appear. "Thank you," she said. Taking the cloth, Tiva shrugged, but there was softness in it. "You can sew a little. Good. We'll teach you the rest." Hours passed without measure. Laughter rose like birdsong. At one point, a baby was passed to May without explanation. She froze, heart racing. But then the child curled against her, like he belonged there, and she didn't let go. When the sun began to lean westward, Nasha stood. "Come again tomorrow," she said to May, as if it had already been decided. May nodded, swallowing hard. Her throat ached not from silence, but from the effort of holding back tears as she walked back to her lodge. The fabric tucked under her arm, the baby's warmth still lingering against her chest. May realized she hadn't thought once that day about being given away or being unwanted. The circle hadn't healed her, but it had started something, a slow stitching, a gathering of the self she'd forgotten she could be. That night, before sleep took her, she whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Nantan, for leaving me long enough to find the women." She didn't know if he heard, but she felt the stillness shift. Like the whole lodge had exhaled, May had not seen him in 3 days, not since she'd stepped into the circle of women. Not since she'd sewn her first strand of beadwork onto the soft garment Tiva had given her. But that morning, as she bent beside the stream, rinsing the day's linen, She saw movement between the trees, broad shoulders, leather boots, a braid swaying down his back. Nantan did not call to her. He simply crouched beside the riverbank, unstrapping a water pouch and filling it. His movements slow, deliberate. May watched in silence, unsure if he'd even noticed her. But when he stood, he turned and his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, they didn't move. Then Nantan offered the faintest nod and turned into the woods, walking slowly enough for her to follow, if she chose. She did. She wiped her hands, gathered her skirt, and stepped onto the path behind him. He said nothing, nor did she. The forest canopy flickered above, casting gold over dirt and moss and rock. Their footsteps were the only sound, as quiet and grounded. Hers lighter, but steady now. After a while, the path widened, and Nantan slowed until they walked side by side. Still no words. May glanced at him, expecting the silence to feel awkward, but it didn't. It felt full, like a fire that doesn't crackle but warms just the same. "I sat with the women," she said finally. Her voice was softer than she intended. "I made thread." Nantan's lips curved just a little, like he didn't want her to see. "Good," he said. "They have many ways to teach." "They do," she nodded. "They gave me a different dress." He looked down briefly, then forward again. "You look strong in it." May laughed quiet, surprised by her own sound. "I didn't expect that word. It's the right one." A bird darted overhead. The breeze picked up. May's hand brushed his once by accident, and neither of them pulled away. A little farther on, they reached a clearing. A wooden frame stood there, half-built, its beams lashed and lifted in a perfect square. "For who?" she asked, pointing. Nantan didn't look at it. "For you, if you stay." Her breath caught. She didn't answer. "Not yet." He didn't press. "You should decide when the thaw comes," he said. "By then, the stream will rise. If you stay, we finish the roof together. If not," he looked at her then, not unkindly, "I'll finish it alone." May nodded, her fingers curling against her palm. They turned and began the walk back. On the way, they passed a small child gathering sticks. Nantan bent to hand him a stray one from the path. The boy smiled, not afraid, not even surprised. "They know you," May said. "You're good to them." Nantan glanced at her sideways. "No one is born knowing how to be gentle," he said. "You learn, or you don't." May stared at him, something sharp and soft rising in her throat. When they reached the lodge, he stopped. "I go again tomorrow." "West Trail. You go a lot," she said. "There are things to bring, things to make right." She looked down, then up. "You always come back." "I do." He held her gaze a beat longer. "Because you're here." Then he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway. Heart pounding, feeling less like a visitor in his world and more like a part of it. The wind shifted that evening. The cold came down hard from the ridgeline, biting sharper than any other night May had endured. Inside the lodge, Tiva tucked her baby into pelts, whispering prayers in her native tongue, while the other women whispered news from the hunting party. Nantan was late returning. May sat near the doorway, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flame flicker low. It had burned down too fast tonight, as if even the fire knew something was wrong. No one said the word out loud, but fear hovered over every breath. When the last ember died, May stepped outside. She didn't ask permission. She just moved into the darkness, boots crunching frost, her hands buried deep in her sleeves. The forest loomed, silent but not empty. The air was full of cold and something else. Expectation. She made it to the edge of the clearing before stopping. Her eyes scanned the trees. Nothing. Her lips trembled. "You said you'd come back," she whispered into the wind. Voice swallowed instantly. She took another step, then another, until the lodge was only a memory behind her. And then hoofbeats faint, not far, she turned. Through the darkness, a shape emerged. Large, steady, familiar. Nantan rode alone. Snow-dusted, his braid half unraveled, a cut on his temple but upright. Alive May didn't run to him. She waited until he dismounted and walked the last steps himself. "You're late," she said, voice cracking despite her steadiness. "Yes, you're bleeding. Yes. Are you hurt?" "Only in the places that matter least." May looked at him in the darkness. "You said you'd come back. And I did." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I had to find something first." He reached into the small sack tied at his belt and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Slowly, reverently, he opened it, revealing a pair of soft doeskin shoes. Hand-stitched with beaded sunbursts across the toes, May gasped. "You made these?" "Not me. My sister. I asked her to make them for a woman who walks beside me, not behind." He dropped to one knee, not with ceremony, but with care, and lifted her foot, slipping off the worn boot. Her sock was damp, frayed at the heel. He didn't flinch. He peeled it away and fitted the new shoe gently around her foot, then the other. She stood still, eyes wide, throat tight. "You're barefoot," she said. "It's freezing." "I walked here with them in my coat," he said simply. "You needed them more." May stared at the shoes on her feet. The man kneeling in front of her, and something broke open in her chest. Not pains, something warmer, something terrifying. "Nantan, you don't need to say anything." He looked up at her. "But I will. I see you, May, as you are. And you are not a burden. You are not shame. You are not ugly. You are the woman I would build a roof for twice." She choked on a laugh. A sob, maybe both. He rose slowly, towering again, but somehow gentler now. She stepped closer until the tips of their shoes touched. "Then let's build it," she said. Together, he exhaled, nodding once. And as they walked back toward the sleeping village, her hand found his in the dark. And this time, she didn't let go. At dawn, the village began to stir, unaware that everything had already changed. Children chased chickens near the cooking pits while smoke curled lazily into the gray morning. May stood beside Nantan at the center fire, where the elders gathered once each moon to speak of land, spirit, and survival. Today, though, the circle was tighter. Tiva stood with her child in arms. Two older men, faces carved deep with time, sat wrapped in layered robes of buffalo hide. Nantan hadn't told her what would happen, only that it mattered she'll stand with him. When the oldest among them, a man called Sika, lifted his hand for silence. May felt her chest tighten. "We see you," Sika said, eyes steady on her. "But the question is, how do you see yourself?" The fire popped. May swallowed. She wanted to hide, wanted to vanish. But Nantan's hand stayed at her back, not pressing, it's only present. "So she stepped forward. I was given," she said quietly. "Traded for peace. I came here angry and ashamed. I thought I was only what was left behind." The elders didn't blink. May took another breath. "But your women gave me warmth. Your children gave me laughter." And she glanced at Nantan, whose expression remained quiet but unreadable. "He gave me time. I know I am not Apache. I know I came from a place that does not understand you, but I want to learn. If you will have me, I want to stay. Not as a peace offering, but as part of this." For a long time, no one spoke. The fire crackled. Then the younger elder leaned forward and spoke a single word. "Daka," belonging. A murmur went up around the circle. Tiva nodded solemnly. And Sika, with his eyes still on May, said, "Then you are no longer guest, no longer burden. You are part of the fire now. Keep it well." May let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Nantan placed a hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. "You spoke truth," he whispered. "They respect that more than bloodlines." That evening, as the village gathered for a small feast, someone brought out a drum. Children danced, women sang. May found herself beside the fire, not outside it. Nantan carved meat from a spit and handed her the first piece without ceremony. She smiled and took it. Later, when the stars filled the sky, he sat beside her on the same rock they'd once passed in silence. "I'm glad you stayed," he said low. "So am I," she replied. Leaning into his shoulder, the drum beat slowed. The fire dimmed, but May no longer feared the dark. She had stepped through it and found herself still whole, maybe even more than whole. She didn't know what the next moon would bring, but she knew one thing clearly now. She had not been given away. She had been found. May woke to birdsong and the scent of juniper smoke drifting softly through the lodge. Her body was still, but her heart beat like. She'd run a long way and finally stopped somewhere safe. The blanket Nantan had covered her with during the night still held a hint of his scent, warm and quiet. She rose slowly and stepped outside barefoot. The earth cooled beneath her soles. The village moved gently. Women carrying water. Children running between drying racks. Old men stretching toward the rising sun. No one stared. No one whispered. For the first time since arriving, May realized they saw her not as the outsider. Not as the pale girl who came wrapped in shame and dust, but as May, just May. Nantan stood near the horses, speaking to a young boy in soft tones. When he saw her, he smiled, not broadly, not with fanfare, but with something deeper. She walked to him, and without asking, took the reins from his hand to help. He didn't stop her. That evening, Tiva came to her with a bundle. "This was mine," she said, "before my daughter grew." Inside was a dress, soft doeskin with beadwork May didn't dare touch. "You don't have to wear it," Tiva said, "but it would be good if you did." May wore it that night. The village gathered again, not for council this time, but for celebration. There was no marriage ceremony as she'd imagined back in the settlement. No priest, no veil, no ring. Only a circle of people she had learned to love. A fire that would never judge her, and Nantan, who waited as if he had always known she would say yes, without a word she did, not aloud, not in a speech, but in the way she stepped beside him and took his hand, palm to palm. It was enough. A child wove a single red thread around their wrist, a quiet custom of unity in the elders.